When my sister and I left the orphanage, all we inherited was Grandpa's farm. But the locked shed had fresh footprints, and what we found inside would change not only our lives, but the fate of an entire valley. This story is about what happens when your only inheritance is a fight you never knew existed. If you've ever felt lost and then found a purpose in the last place you expected, hit that subscribe button, because this community is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I became homeless. It was also the day I became a guardian. Two titles the state gives you without much of a ceremony. The ceremony, in my case, was a cardboard box containing 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read 100 times, and a toothbrush. My sister Maya stood beside me in the sterile hallway of the Eastgate group home, her own box held tight against her chest. She was 16, and her legal status was now my problem. The state's idea of a parting gift was a manila envelope, a bus token, and a weary-looking social worker named Ms. Albright, who had the permanently exhausted eyes of someone who'd seen too many stories like ours end badly. "Leo," she said, her voice as flat as the linoleum floor. "This is it." She handed me the envelope. It felt impossibly thin, too light to contain a future. "Inside is the deed to your grandfather's property. It's in your name now, effective today. Congratulations on your majority." It sounded more like a diagnosis than a celebration. She avoided looking at Maya, which was probably for the best. Maya had a way of staring back that made people uncomfortable. A quiet, assessing gaze that saw right through the professional sympathy to the bureaucratic indifference underneath. I took the envelope. My fingers were numb. For 10 years, since we were 8 and 6, this was the day we'd whispered about in the dark. The day we'd be free. Now that it was here, freedom just felt like a different kind of cage. One without walls, but with a much lower ceiling. "What about her?" I asked, nodding toward Maya. "She's your dependent until she turns 18, Ms. Albright recited, the words worn smooth from overuse. "You're her legal guardian. The state provides a small monthly stipend for her care, which will be deposited into the bank account I helped you set up last week. It's not much, but it's something." She gave a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's better than most get." I didn't say thank you. The words felt like a lie. Better than most wasn't the same as good. It wasn't even the same as okay. It was just a different shade of bad. I looked down at the envelope. Through the thin paper I could see the shape of a key. A single, old-fashioned skeleton key. "Is there anything else?" She hesitated, a flicker of something real crossing her face. Pity, maybe, or just professional obligation. "Look, Leo, the property, it's not much. The taxes haven't been paid in 3 years. There's a lien on it from the county. And the structures are neglected." She chose the word carefully. "There are offers. Developers have been circling that area for a while. A company called Ridgeview Estates has a standing offer on the table. It's in the file. It's not great, but it would clear the debt and leave you with a little bit to start over. A clean slate." A clean slate. That's what they'd told us when we first came to Eastgate. They took our names and gave us case numbers. They took our history and gave us a file. They promised us a clean slate, but all they did was wipe away the parts of us that mattered, leaving a blank space where a family used to be. My grandfather wasn't just a file. He was the smell of sawdust and pipe tobacco. He was big, calloused hands that could fix a tractor engine or gently remove a splinter. He was the one who taught me how to read the clouds, and Maya how to name the wildflowers. Then, one day, he was just gone. A social worker had come to our little school, taken us into the principal's office, and told us our grandfather was unable to care for us anymore. They used institutional words like unfit and neglect, words that didn't fit the man we knew. They never told us where he went or why. They just took us away. And now, all that was left of him was a piece of paper, a debt, and a key. "We're not selling," I heard myself say. The words came out stronger than I felt. Beside me, Maya nodded, a quick, sharp movement. It was a decision we'd made without speaking. The farm was the only piece of him we had left. Selling it felt like the final betrayal. Ms. Albright sighed, a long, slow release of air. "Okay, Leo, it's your decision. The key is for the front door of the farmhouse. The bus to Millfield leaves in an hour. It's a 5-mile walk from the bus stop to the property. Good luck." She didn't offer to shake my hand. She just turned and walked away, her sensible shoes squeaking on the polished floor, the sound echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence. We were alone. 2 kids and 2 cardboard boxes in a hallway that smelled of bleach and quiet desperation. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped her box. But her eyes were clear. "Ready?" I asked. She gave another one of her small, definite nods. "Ready." We walked out of the front doors of Eastgate and didn't look back. The city air hit me, thick with exhaust fumes and the smell of hot asphalt. It was the only air I'd really known for a decade. The bus station was a chaotic swirl of people, a river of strangers flowing around us. We were just 2 pieces of driftwood, unnoticed. I used the last of my cash from under-the-table jobs washing dishes to buy 2 tickets to Millfield. The name on the ticket felt alien. It was a place from a dream, a half-remembered childhood. The bus ride was 4 hours of watching the world transform. The concrete towers and cramped apartment blocks of the city bled into sprawling suburbs, which then gave way to strip malls, and finally to open fields. The sky got bigger. The greens got greener. Maya pressed her face against the window, watching the landscape roll by. I opened the manila envelope. Inside was the deed, a thick, formal document with our grandfather's name, Alistair Finch, and now mine, Leo Finch. There was a tax delinquency notice, the amount in red making my stomach clench. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing. There was the offer letter from Ridgeview Estates, printed on heavy cream-colored paper that felt predatory. The offer was insultingly low, just enough to cover the alleged debt and toss us a few $1,000s. And at the very bottom, tucked behind the deed, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was brittle, yellowed with age. It was my grandfather's handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a letter, just a single sentence scrawled in his familiar, spiky script. "The answer is in the harvest." I stared at the words until they blurred. The harvest? The farm hadn't produced a harvest in over a decade. It was a dead place. What could he possibly mean? I showed the note to Maya. She traced the words with her finger, her expression unreadable. "He was always talking in riddles," she said softly. It wasn't a complaint, it was just a fact. The bus finally hissed to a stop at a crossroads marked by a rusty sign that read Millfield. The driver grunted, "This is you," and opened the door onto a quiet 2-lane road. There was no station, no shelter, just the sign and a gas station with a single, ancient pump. We stepped off the bus into a wall of sound, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of wind in the tall grass. It was so different from the city's constant mechanical hum. It was a living silence. The bus pulled away, leaving us in a cloud of diesel smoke. We were truly on our own now. The man at the gas station, a leathery old-timer with a kind, crinkled smile, gave us directions. "Finch property? Sure. Old Alistair's place. Shame about that. Head down this road about 5 miles. Can't miss it. Sits up on a rise. Or what's left of it, anyway." He looked at us, his eyes lingering on our boxes. "You his grandkids?" "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded slowly. "He was a good man, your grandpa. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. The valley ain't been the same." He didn't elaborate. He just turned back to polishing a glass jar of pickled eggs on the counter, leaving his words hanging in the air. The 5-mile walk was a pilgrimage. The sun beat down on us, and the cardboard boxes grew heavier with every step, their edges digging into our palms. The road was cracked asphalt, bordered by fields of corn and soy that stretched to the horizon. We walked in silence for a long time, the rhythm of our footsteps the only sound between us. With each mile, the weight of the last 10 years seemed to press down on me. The sterile rooms, the scheduled meals, the casual cruelty of other lost kids, the constant feeling of being a temporary object in a system designed for storage, not for growth. I thought I'd feel lighter when I left. Instead, I felt heavier. "Do you remember it?" Maya asked, her voice small. "Some of it," I said. "I remember the big porch and the barn. He used to let me climb up to the hayloft. I remembered the smell of hay, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. I remembered the rough, splintery feel of the ladder rungs under my hands. "I remember the flowers," she said. "Grandma's garden. He kept it up after she was gone. There were peonies, big pink ones." We were remembering pieces of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. A ghost life. As we rounded a long, slow curve in the road, I saw it. Up on a small hill, set back from the road, was a silhouette I recognized from my deepest memories. A farmhouse, a barn, and a collection of smaller outbuildings, all stark against the wide blue sky. Even from a distance, I could see what Ms. Albright meant by neglected. The roof of the barn sagged in the middle. The farmhouse paint was peeling away in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The fields that surrounded it weren't neat rows of corn, but a tangled mess of weeds and wildflowers. It looked like a skeleton, the bones of a life picked clean by time and hardship. My heart sank. This was it. This was our inheritance, a ruin. As we got closer, the scale of the decay became more apparent. The white picket fence that once lined the driveway was mostly gone, the remaining posts leaning at odd angles like tired soldiers. The driveway itself was 2 dirt ruts overgrown with grass. We walked up to the house, our steps slowing. The porch steps groaned under my weight. I looked at Maya. Her face was a mask of disappointment. This wasn't the magical place from her faint memories. This was a place of failure. "Well," I said, trying to sound cheerful and failing completely, "home sweet home." I pulled out the old skeleton key. It looked ancient, something from a fairy tale. I pushed it into the lock on the front door. It resisted, gritty with rust. I had to jiggle it, push it hard, before I felt the tumblers give with a loud, grating click. The door swung inward on a single, protesting hinge, opening into a dark, musty-smelling foyer. Dust lay thick on everything, a soft gray blanket covering a life that had stopped abruptly. A grandfather clock stood silent against one wall, its hands frozen at 3:15. Sunlight struggled through the grimy windows, illuminating swirling dust particles in the air. It smelled of decay, of mice and damp and forgotten things. But underneath it all, faint and far away, was another smell. The smell of pipe tobacco. The smell of him. We set our boxes down. The sound echoed in the stillness. We spent the next hour moving through the house like ghosts, room by room. The kitchen was a time capsule. A chipped coffee mug sat by the sink. The living room had a large stone fireplace, the hearth swept clean. An armchair with a worn Afghan thrown over the back sat facing it, an indentation still visible in the cushion, as if he'd just gotten up. In the 2 small bedrooms upstairs, the beds were neatly made. It was all just waiting. It was heartbreaking. He hadn't abandoned this place. He had been torn from it, just like us. The narrative the state had fed us, that he was unfit, that he had let things go, it felt wrong. This wasn't the house of a man who didn't care. This was the house of a man who was interrupted. We ended up back outside on the porch as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The sheer scale of the task ahead was crushing. The house needed a new roof, new windows, a deep cleaning that felt archaeological in scope. The plumbing probably didn't work. The electricity was surely off. We had no food, no money to buy any, and only a tiny stipend that wouldn't even cover the back taxes, let alone repairs. Ms. Albright's voice echoed in my head. Take the offer, a clean slate. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was a sentimental fantasy, and the smart thing to do was to sell the bones and walk away. Leo, Maya said, her voice pulling me from my thoughts. She was standing at the edge of the porch, looking out past the overgrown yard toward a small, windowless building set off to the side. A shed. It was weathered, but unlike the barn, its roofline was straight. Its door was made of thick, heavy planks, secured with a large, rusty-looking padlock. What's in there? I don't know, I said. Tools, I guess. A lawnmower. I remembered him telling us to stay away from it. He called it his workshop and said it was full of dangerous things. We walked toward it, our feet sinking slightly into the damp earth near the building. The ground here was softer, shaded by a large oak tree. And that's when I saw them. Footprints, 2 sets of them, leading from the edge of the woods directly to the shed door, and then back into the woods. They weren't old. The edges were still sharp, the impressions deep in the dark, damp soil. They were from heavy boots, the kind contractors or work crews wear. My blood went cold. Someone's been here, I whispered. Maya knelt down, her small fingers tracing the edge of one of the prints. They're fresh, from today, or maybe yesterday. I looked at the padlock. It was big and industrial, not the kind of cheap lock you get at a hardware store. It was caked in rust, but the shackle, where it passed through the hasp, was scraped and shiny. Someone had been trying to get in, or maybe they had a key. Why would anyone be trying to break into a derelict shed on an abandoned farm? It didn't make any sense. Unless there was something in there. Something more than just old tools. Suddenly, Grandpa's note felt less like a riddle and more like a map. The answer is in the harvest. What if the harvest wasn't something you grew in the fields? What if it was something you stored? Something you protected? We have to get in there, I said, a new sense of urgency coursing through me. The despair I'd been feeling was replaced by a sharp, focused curiosity. The footprints were a question. The locked shed was a promise. For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't just grief or fear. It was purpose. We didn't have a key for the padlock, and it was too strong to break. I went to the barn, the huge doors groaning open to reveal a cavernous space filled with shadows and the ghosts of old machinery. A rusted tractor sat like a sleeping metal giant. I searched through piles of junk and debris, my hands getting covered in grease and grime, until I found what I was looking for: a heavy iron crowbar. It was heavy in my hands, a solid piece of steel. It felt like a weapon. It felt like a key. When I got back to the shed, Maya was still there, standing guard. She watched me with wide, serious eyes as I jammed the tip of the crowbar into the gap between the door and the frame, right next to the hasp. I put all my weight on it. The wood groaned. Splinters flew. I grunted with the effort, my muscles straining. The old wood was tough, seasoned by decades of sun and rain. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crack like a gunshot, the hasp ripped free from the doorframe. The padlock fell to the ground with a dull thud. The door was free. I paused, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at Maya. She nodded, her face pale but determined. I took a deep breath, grabbed the wooden handle, and pulled the heavy door open. It didn't smell like oil and rust inside. It smelled like old paper, like a library. The last of the evening light spilled into the small, windowless space, revealing not a workshop, but an office. Against the far wall stood a heavy wooden desk. A single, straight-backed chair was tucked neatly beneath it. On the wall above the desk was a huge, detailed topographical map of the entire valley, dotted with dozens of colored pins. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their drawers all labeled in our grandfather's spiky handwriting. This wasn't a shed. This was a command center, a war room. My gaze was drawn to the desk. It was clear of everything except for one object, placed squarely in the center. It was a heavy, dark green metal box, the kind used by the military to store ammunition. It was closed with two heavy latches and secured with a small brass lock. Next to the box was a single small key, not for the box, but a different key. Taped to it was a small folded piece of paper. My name was written on it. Leo. My hand trembled as I picked it up. This was it. This was what the footprints were for. This was what someone was looking for. I unfolded the note. It was from him. The key is for the post office box in town, number 314. What you need to open this is in there. Be smart, son. Be brave. This is your inheritance now. The post office. He'd left something for me. Something that would lead me back here, to this box. It was a trail of breadcrumbs laid out years in advance. He had known this day was coming. He had prepared for it. He had prepared for me. I looked around the small, cramped office, at the map, at the files, at the imposing metal box. The weight of his expectation, of his trust, settled on my shoulders. It was terrifying, and it was the first time in 10 years I had felt truly seen. "We have to go back to town," I said to Maya. "Now." The walk back to Millfield felt completely different. The darkness was falling fast, but we weren't scared. We were energized. The 5 miles passed in a blur of shared purpose. The town was quiet when we arrived, most of the lights in the small storefronts already off. The post office was a small brick building, its lobby still open for box access. The air inside was cool and silent. We found the wall of brass mailboxes. Box 314 was near the bottom. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. Inside was a single thick envelope, addressed to me. It was sealed with wax, stamped with my grandfather's signet ring, a stylized F. I remembered that ring. I tore it open. Inside were two things. The first was a small brass key, the key for the metal box. The second was a letter, a long one. I unfolded it, and my grandfather's voice, silent for a decade, began to speak from the page. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then you are 18 years old. You are a man, and I am likely gone. There are so many things I need to tell you, so many things I was never able to say. I am sorry. Those are the first words I owe you. I am sorry for the silence. I am sorry for the pain my absence must have caused you and your sister. Please believe me when I tell you that not a day has gone by in the last 10 years that I haven't thought of you both. Not an hour." My eyes blurred with tears. I had to stop and wipe them away with the back of my hand. Maya put her hand on my arm, her presence a small, warm anchor in the storm that was breaking inside me. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. "I need you to understand why I did what I did. They told you I was unfit, that I neglected you. It's a lie. But it's a lie I allowed them to believe. It was the only way to keep you safe. Around the time you turned 8, things in the valley started to change. A development corporation, Ridgeview Estates, came to town. They started buying up family farms, offering prices that seemed too good to be true. At first, people were happy. But then, for those who refused to sell, strange things started happening. Wells would mysteriously run dry. Fences would be cut, livestock getting out. There were fires, accidents. The authorities always ruled them accidental, but we knew. We all knew. I felt a chill run down my spine. Ridgeview Estates, the name from the offer letter. They weren't just developers, they were predators. I started looking into them, the letter continued. I was a stubborn old fool. I thought I could fight them. I started collecting evidence, talking to other farmers, documenting the incidents, tracing their corporate ownership. I found out they weren't just trying to build vacation homes. They were after the water rights. The aquifer that runs under this whole valley is one of the purest in the state, and they had a plan to privatize it and sell it to bottling companies. Our farms, our homes, they were just standing in the way. But they found out I was snooping. I got a visit, not from a lawyer, from 2 men who made it very clear that if I didn't stop and if I didn't sell, something bad would happen. They didn't threaten me. They threatened you. They knew you were my whole world. They said it would be a shame if 2 sweet kids had an accident out on the farm. That's when I knew I couldn't win. Not while you were here with me. I couldn't protect you and fight them at the same time. So I had to make a choice, the most horrible choice of my life. I had to send you away. I had to become the villain in your story so that you could have a future. I called Child Protective Services on myself. I made them believe I was a drunk, that the house was unsafe, that I couldn't care for you. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, watching you get into that car. It broke me, but it kept you alive. It kept you off their radar. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken the old man on the hill. I had to stop reading. I couldn't see the words anymore. I leaned against the cold brass mailboxes and sobbed. Not quiet, dignified tears, but gut-wrenching, ugly sobs that tore their way up from a place of grief I hadn't known was still there. All the anger I had carried for 10 years, all the feelings of abandonment and betrayal, they all just shattered. He hadn't abandoned us. He had sacrificed himself for us. He had given up everything, his home, his reputation, his family, just to keep us safe. Maya wrapped her arms around me and we just stood there in the empty post office, 2 orphans clinging to each other, the truth a weight and a comfort all at once. It took a long time for the tears to stop. When they finally did, I felt hollowed out, emptied of a poison I hadn't even known I was carrying. The story of my life, the one I had told myself for a decade, was a lie, and the truth was so much more painful and so much more beautiful than I could have imagined. I finally finished the letter. The fight isn't over, Leo. Inside the metal box, you will find everything I gathered, all my research, all the evidence. It's probably not enough to win in a court of law, not against a company with their resources, but it's a start. It's the truth, and the truth is a seed. In the right hands, it can grow into a forest. I don't know what the world will be like when you read this. I don't know if I'll still be here, but the farm is yours. The fight is yours, if you choose to take it. You don't have to. You can take the money they offer and run. You can build a new life, far away from all this. There is no shame in that. Your survival is all I ever wanted. But if you have any of my stubborn blood in you, you'll stay. You'll fight. The answer, as I told you, is in the harvest. The harvest is the evidence. It's the truth I gathered and saved for you. It is your inheritance. Whatever you choose, know that I love you. I have always loved you. Take care of your sister, your loving grandfather, Alistair. The letter fell from my fingers. I looked at Maya. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears, but her face was set with a fierce resolve I recognized. It was the same look she'd had in the hallway at Eastgate. It was the look of someone who had made up her mind. This is the point in the story where everything changes, where you're standing on a cliff and you have to decide whether to turn back or to jump. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where a truth is revealed that changes your entire past and redefines your entire future. It's a terrifying place to be. It's also where you find out who you really are. If you've ever faced a choice like that, or if you're facing one now, I want you to know you're not alone. This community is built for people who understand that the hardest paths are often the ones worth taking. Let me know in the comments about a time you had to make a choice that scared you. I read every single one, and your stories matter. Now, let's get back to that night, standing in the cold, silent post office with a key in our hands, and a choice that would define the rest of our lives. There was never really a choice, not for us. To walk away would have been to spit on his grave, to nullify the sacrifice he made. All those years of feeling like abandoned goods, like we were worthless. He had been protecting us. He had been fighting for us in secret. Now, the fight had been passed on. We walked the 5 miles back to the farm for the second time that night. The moon was high in the sky, illuminating our path. We didn't need to talk. We both knew what we had to do. Back in the shed, the air was thick with anticipation. It felt like a sacred place now, a chapel dedicated to a hidden war. I took the small brass key, my hand steady this time, and inserted it into the lock on the big metal box. It turned with a satisfying click. I lifted the latches, the sound loud in the stillness. I took a deep breath and lifted the heavy lid. The contents were organized with meticulous care. On top was another envelope, this one thick with cash. I counted it, $10,000, in small used bills. A note attached to the bundle read, "Seed money, for food, for gas, for keeping the lights on. Use it wisely. It's all I had left to give." $10,000. It was a fortune. It was life support. Underneath the cash, the box was filled with notebooks, files, and cassette tapes. It was his investigation. We spent the rest of the night, and most of the next day, sitting on the floor of the shed, poring over our grandfather's legacy. We lit an old kerosene lamp we found, its warm, flickering light pushing back the shadows. We laid out the contents of the box on the dusty floor, creating a mosaic of one man's quiet crusade. The notebooks were filled with his observations, written in his spiky, urgent hand. Dates, times, license plate numbers. Descriptions of cars seen near a neighbor's barn just before it burned down. Notes from hushed conversations with other farmers who were being intimidated. It was a decade of quiet, patient intelligence gathering. The files contained corporate records for Ridgeview Estates. He had traced their ownership through a dozen shell companies to a massive multinational water consortium. He had maps of the aquifer, geological surveys he'd paid for himself, proving its size and purity. He had copies of water rights applications Ridgeview had pre-filed with the state, contingent on acquiring the land. It was all there. The motive, the means, the pattern of intimidation. The cassette tapes were the most damning. There were about 20 of them, each labeled with a date and a name. We found an old shoebox-style cassette player in one of the filing cabinets, and thankfully the batteries still had a faint charge. I pushed the first tape in and pressed play. The hiss of the tape was followed by my grandfather's voice, low and calm. October 14th. Conversation with Jim Peterson. Then another man's voice, shaky and scared. They came by again last night, Alistair. Said my well was going to be the next to go dry if I didn't sign the papers. They offered me pennies. I told them to get off my land, but my wife, she's scared. We've got kids. We listened to tape after tape. It was a chorus of fear and desperation from our neighbors, people our grandfather had known his whole life. He had been their confessor, their secret archivist. He had recorded their stories, preserving their testimony. He even had a recording of one of his own encounters. The voices of the two men were smooth, almost friendly, but the menace underneath was unmistakable. "You're a stubborn man, Alistair," one of them said. "This valley is changing. You can't stop progress. It would be a real shame if something were to happen to those beautiful grandkids of yours. Accidents happen all the time on a farm." Hearing those words, knowing what they cost him, I felt a surge of cold, hard rage. But there was a problem. As he'd said in his letter, it was damning, but it might not be enough. It was circumstantial. It was the word of scared farmers against a billion-dollar corporation. There was no smoking gun, no single piece of evidence that would blow the whole thing open. It was a mountain of suspicion, but maybe not a mountain of proof. We worked through the day, fueled by stale crackers we found in the kitchen and water from an old hand pump outside that miraculously still worked, pulling up cold, clear water from deep in the earth. As evening approached, we reached the bottom of the box, and there we found it. Tucked into a false bottom I almost didn't notice was one last file. It was thinner than the others. The label on it just had one word: leverage. Inside was not about Ridgeview. It was about one man, Marcus Thorne. According to my grandfather's notes, Thorne was the vice president of acquisitions for Ridgeview, the man running the ground operation in our valley. He was the public face, the one who spoke at town meetings about progress and opportunity. But the file wasn't about his corporate life. It was about his personal one. Grandpa had somehow uncovered that years ago, before he worked for Ridgeview. Thorne had been involved in a hit-and-run accident. A young man was killed. Thorne had been drunk. His father, a powerful judge, had made the whole thing disappear. The records were buried, the witnesses paid off. But my grandfather had found one of them. A bartender who had served Thorne that night and was willing to talk. There was a signed, notarized affidavit from the bartender, and a cassette tape. This was it. This was the smoking gun. It had nothing to do with the water rights or the intimidation of farmers. But it was leverage. It was a weapon aimed directly at the man in charge. Exposing this would destroy Marcus Thorne. And it might just be enough to make Ridgeview abandon their plans for the valley, to avoid the scandal. But it was also blackmail. I held the file in my hands, the weight of it immense. This was the final part of the inheritance. Not just a fight, but a moral choice. What do you do with a weapon like this? Do you hand it over to the police, seeking justice for a crime long buried? That might put Thorne in jail, but it might not stop Ridgeview. They would just replace him. Do you leak it to the press? That would cause a scandal, but the company could distance themselves, call him a rogue employee. Or do you use it the way I think my grandfather intended? Do you use it as a lever to force their hand? Do you approach them and say, "Leave this valley and everyone in it alone, or this file goes public"? It was the harder right versus the easier wrong. Or maybe the harder right versus the more effective wrong. I didn't know. My grandfather had fought them with integrity by gathering facts. But he had left this dirty bomb, as a last resort. He had left the final, ugliest move up to me. "What are we going to do?" Maya asked. She had been reading over my shoulder, her face grim. "I don't know," I said honestly. I felt like I was 16 again, a kid with no idea how the world worked. He fought them with truth, but he left us this lie, this secret. He left it for us to use, Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. He collected the truth for years, and it wasn't enough. So he found a different kind of truth, the kind they understand. She was right. You can't fight monsters by quoting poetry at them. You have to speak their language. Their language was power, leverage, and fear. My grandfather had given us a voice in that language. At the very bottom of the file, there was one last thing, a business card. It belonged to a man named Elias Vance, with the title Investigative Journalist, Retired, and a phone number. A handwritten note from Grandpa was clipped to it. "Elias is the only man I ever trusted. He owes me a favor. If you decide to fight, call him. He'll know what to do." This was the path. This was the next step. Not to act rashly, but to seek counsel, to use the wisdom of an ally. We hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. We were exhausted, emotionally and physically. But for the first time, we had a plan. We took the seed money. We packed up the box, locked it securely in the shed, and walked back to the farmhouse. The house still felt sad and empty, but now it felt like our sad, empty house. It wasn't just a ruin, it was a battleground. It was home. That night, we didn't sleep upstairs in the dusty beds. We took the old Afghan from the armchair and slept on the floor in front of the cold fireplace, the metal box from the shed between us like a guard dog. We were no longer just two orphans who had been thrown away by the system. We were the guardians of a secret, the keepers of a legacy. We were the Finches of Millfield, and our fight was just beginning. The next morning, we used some of the seed money to buy groceries in town. We bought bread, cheese, eggs, and coffee. It felt strange to be buying things, to have money in my pocket. We also bought a cheap, prepaid cell phone. Back at the farm, sitting at the dusty kitchen table, I dialed the number on the business card. It rang 4 times, and I was about to hang up when a gruff, gravelly voice answered. "Vance?" Hello?" I stammered, my heart pounding. "My name is Leo Finch. I'm Alastair Finch's grandson." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of a match striking, then a long exhale. "Alastair's grandson," the voice repeated, softer this time. "I'll be damned. I was wondering when you'd call. Your grandfather told me you might. Said you'd be 18 this summer. Where are you?" "I'm at the farm," I said. Another pause. "And you found his harvest?" "Yes, sir. We found everything." "Good," Vance said. "Don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone. And for God's sake, don't go waving that thorn file around. That's not a grenade, it's a nuclear bomb. You don't know the fallout. I'm in the city. It'll take me a few hours. I'll be there by sundown. There's a diner in Millfield, the corner booth. Meet me there at 7. And son?" "Yes?" "You did good. Your grandfather would be proud." He hung up. The relief was so immense it almost brought me to my knees. We had an ally, a professional, someone who knew the rules of this ugly game. For the rest of the day, we worked. We threw open the windows of the house, letting in fresh air and sunlight. We swept the floors, beat the dust out of the rugs, washed the grime from the windows. It was a huge task, but it felt good to be doing something physical, something constructive. With every bit of dust we swept away, we were reclaiming the space. We were making it ours. Maya found the old flower beds, choked with weeds, and began to clear them, her hands gentle as she searched for any sign of her grandmother's peonies. That evening, we met Elias Vance at the diner. He was a small, wiry man, with a face like a road map and eyes that missed nothing. He looked us over, then ordered 3 coffees and a plate of fries. We sat in a booth, and in low voices, I told him everything. I told him about the letters, the evidence, and the file on Thorn. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he stirred his coffee for a long time. "Your grandfather was the most stubborn, honorable man I ever met," he said finally. "He was trying to build a perfect case, a clean case. But he was smart enough to know that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. That Thorn file, that's our ace in the hole." "So we use it?" I asked. "Not directly," Vance said. "We don't blackmail. We don't negotiate. We do something smarter. We build a fortress around you. Your grandfather's evidence gives us the moral high ground. The Thorn file gives us the leverage to make them listen. We're going to get you a lawyer, a good one, pro bono. A friend of mine who owes me a favor and hates corporate bullies. We're going to file an injunction against Ridgeview, citing a pattern of harassment, using your grandfather's files as preliminary evidence. We'll tie them up in court. At the same time, I am going to make a quiet inquiry to an old contact at the State Justice Department about a certain buried hit-and-run case. We won't release the information. We'll just let Thorn know that we have it. We let him know that if he continues to push, the story might just find its way to the right people. We box them in. We make it more expensive and more dangerous for them to continue than to walk away. It was brilliant. It was strategic. It was a way to use the power of the secret without becoming the kind of people we were fighting. It was a path forward that felt right. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Elias was true to his word. He brought in a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, who seemed to relish the fight. She filed the injunction, and Ridgeview's local operations ground to a halt. Elias made his quiet inquiries, and suddenly the aggressive offer letters stopped. A new set of letters came. this time from Ridgeview's corporate lawyers, all bluster and denial. But the tone had shifted. They were on the defensive. Meanwhile, Maya and I made the farmhouse a home. We scrubbed and painted. We got the electricity turned back on. We planted a small vegetable garden. Maya even found a single, stubborn peony root that had survived all the years of neglect. She tended to it like it was the most precious thing in the world. The people in town started to treat us differently. The story of Alistair's grandkids taking on the big developer spread quickly. People would nod to us on the street. The man at the gas station gave us free coffee. An old woman brought us a freshly baked apple pie. We weren't just two orphans anymore. We were part of a community. We were part of the valley. The legal battle would be long, Sarah warned us. It could take years. Ridgeview wouldn't give up easily. But we had a foothold. We had a chance. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. The house was no longer a ruin. It was scarred and weathered, but it was strong. It was ours. Maya came and sat next to me. She held up a small green sprout in a pot. "The peony," she said, a rare, brilliant smile on her face. "It's growing." I looked at the tiny green shoot, then out at the valley, our valley, spread out before us. My grandfather's inheritance wasn't the land, the debt, or even the evidence. It was this. It was the choice to stay, the choice to fight, the choice to put down roots in a place that others had tried to destroy. It was the chance to take something broken and make it whole again. It was the hardest, most beautiful inheritance a man could ever receive. This journey taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you fight for. It's a place you build, sometimes from the ground up, with nothing but stubbornness and a little bit of hope. It taught me that the stories we tell ourselves about our past can be prisons, but the truth, no matter how painful, can set you free. Our fight with Ridgeview is far from over, but we're not afraid anymore. We have a home, we have a purpose, and we have each other. If our story means anything, it's that you're stronger than you think, and you're never as alone as you feel. There are allies and answers in the most unexpected places. Thank you for listening to our story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. This is a space for stories about real strength and second chances. And I want you to share your own story in the comments. Tell me about a time you found home, or a time you chose to fight. Because every story of resilience is a light in the dark, and we need as many of those as we can get.